Going on to slide 15. This graphic of a book written about Lee Kuan Yew's political career, it certainly is a book that paints Lee Kuan Yew in the best possible light. You can see him as the hero of the political process. When Singapore was ejected from Malaysia, then Lee Kuan Yew became its leader. He retired in the late 1990s, or I suppose it was maybe 1995. I'd have to look that up. But his son, let's go on to slide 16, became the prime minister after that, Lee Hsien Loong. He's also known as BG Lee, BG meaning Brigadier General, because he had a army career before he entered politics to take the place of his father as national leader. Lee Kuan Yew, the father, remains senior minister, and his son, Lee Hsien Loong, wishes to stay in power. He's indicated he wants to continue to run for re-election, which is virtually assured in the current political system that they have in Singapore, until he's 70 years old, which I think would be in about, must be about 2016, 2017, something like that. It's an extremely effective surveillance state that they have in Singapore. I can say that, having lived there for 5 years in the late 1990s. They've had very good economic growth. They started off with light manufacturing, like Taiwan. They never went to heavy manufacturing, but they did bring in quite a bit of electronics and other advanced technology, medical technology, for example, and the financial sector developed quite a bit like Hong Kong. And you can find, if you go to Asia today and you visit both cities, you will see that there are many things that are similar between Hong Kong and Singapore, and they are, you might say, rival cities with each other, trying to keep up with the development of the other in order to prevent one from being overwhelmed by the other. However, they serve two different regions, really, and so there isn't much chance of that. Let's go on to, and I should mention that they have quite an emphasis on ethnic harmony. And why is this? We'll discuss that. There have been similar problems in Singapore as there have been in Malaysia. If we go on to slide 17, both Singapore and Malaysia, very curious relationship they have. Of course, Malaysia ejected Singapore to avoid putting up with an increasing Chinese population in its very unfortunate ethnic political scene. It's interesting that you can buy books critical of the Singapore government in Malaysia, and you can buy virtual mirror image critical books of Malaysia in Singapore and Malaysian figures in Singapore. Malaysia had its problems compared to Singapore. Singapore has been, as I mentioned, very closely controlled and in a highly successful way by its government as the decades have gone on. Malaysia has tried to do the same thing. Both countries inherited from the British the Internal Security Act, the other ISI. The Internal Security Act allows each of these governments on the books to arrest and detain for up to 2 years anybody who might be threatening social order, in particular threatening social order by fomenting ethnic unrest. In practice, this measure is not at all restricted to problems of ethnic unrest. They can have to do with mere suspicion by the police that someone is going to commit a crime. Quite often they have good suspicion when gang activity, for example, is indicated. But it means that the courts do not weigh in at all on that process. Anyway, as we discussed 2 weeks ago, there was a guerrilla movement, the Communist Party of Malaysia, made up mostly of ethnic Chinese, pursued in the 1950s, which became known as the emergency era. But after that was, for the most part, cleaned up, foreign manufacturing began to come in. Intel, for example, entered Malaysia in 1968 when it was a brand new company and set up their first overseas factory in the northern island city of Penang. And other companies followed. Penang now has a gigantic export processing zone, or free trade zone it's called, and these free trade zones also exist in other parts of Malaysia, in Klang, the port near Kuala Lumpur, the capital, in Malacca, and in a few other places. The social instability problem in Malaysia, however, is very serious. It led to a terrible set of riots, not only on the 13th of May, 1969, but in the period before and a little bit after, where the reason for that, it's in your readings, but to boil it down to its nub, the reason for the 13 May 1969 riots, which people still remember and still talk about in private, was that the Chinese political parties had done particularly well in an election on May 12th, and there were parades to celebrate this in Kuala Lumpur. One of the parades went off the chart of where it was permitted to go by the police and went through a Malay neighborhood, and difficulties resulted, just like the Ku Klux Klan, for example, in our own country likes to go through neighborhoods with a lot of Jewish people. That's what happened in this case, and so they were attacked in the course of their demonstration, and then there was a widespread phenomenon of ethnic violence that resulted. So it's never far from the surface in both Singapore and Malaysia. The three main groups of people, the ethnic Malays, the ethnic Chinese, and the Indians, have very little love for each other. There's a lot of emphasis on ethnic harmony in both countries, particularly Singapore. However, when groups of people of a single ethnic group are together, and they will often complain about the other ethnic groups, and if you happen to be a foreigner in one of those gatherings, then people might assume that you're safe to complain to, and you'll hear all sorts of marvelous things about the Chinese or the Indians or the Bhumis, as the Chinese like to call the Malays. That's short for Bumiputra, which means son of the soil. Anyway, let's go on to slide 18 and wrap this up and talk a little bit about Indonesia, which is a majority Muslim country, but officially secular. Discrimination is not overtly tolerated in Indonesia, but it is tolerated. The majority is not really interested in militant activity, but there have been periods, May 1998, for example, when anti-Chinese riots have left hundreds dead. It's not legal, either there or in Malaysia, to engage in evangelical activity of the Christian sort. And if you were to do something like that, then you'd be in trouble. low-cost light manufacturing has been in place for a number of decades. If you take a look at your running shoes, you might find that they're made in Indonesia, for example. There's an aerospace industry there, but it hasn't really, no pun intended, gotten off the ground. And progress into more advanced areas of industry has been difficult. It's unfortunate, but it is true that the lack of political and social stability in Indonesia is even more severe than it is in other countries of the region, and this has stunted economic progress. Well, next week, going to slide 19, we'll be talking about a rising China in the region since the turn of the millennium, since 2000, and the effect that this is having on the politics and social relations of Northeast and Southeast Asia. Thank you very much.